everyone. Welcome to the May 25th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski as we look ahead to Belmont Park's Saturday card this weekend. It is Memorial Day weekend, so we're likely to have some nice racing on 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, but we're going to focus on Belmont Park Saturday for this podcast. Admittedly, not the strongest card. I mean, some field size issues throughout the day until you get to the very end, but there is a pretty interesting stakes race in the mix there. Race 7, the Soaring Softly, just a 6-horse field, but I think there's a lot to discuss in that race despite the small field. And full disclosure, I'm taking some days off towards the end of the weekend, so this is really the only card that I have the time to handicap, so we're stuck with Belmont, but I think that we're going to find some interesting angles from which to approach this card, Craig.
Yeah, I agree. And we've talked about before how hard pick fives can be. Sometimes it's nice to have every race not be 10 or 11 or 12 horses, which make those things very, very difficult to hit, especially if you're playing on a limited budget. So I really don't mind these kind of sequences. And I don't think there were a whole bunch of better alternatives out there this week anyway.
And I know we've said this before. I mean, the setup of this podcast is that we always discuss a pick 5 sequence, but it doesn't say you necessarily have to play the pick 5 if it doesn't appeal to you, or if this sequence at Belmont maybe doesn't suit your opinions. There are plenty of other wagers that you can play. And often when we give out ideas on this podcast, Craig and I will sometimes say, this is the kind of horse that I'd prefer to bet to win, or so on and so forth. This is a race for vertical wagers. So even though we're going to discuss it from the angle of a potential pick 5 play, that might not be the right bet for this sequence. And sometimes we'll say that at the end of the podcast, that this is just not a sequence that I really want to play, even though we went through the time of discussing it. And I think that's part of handicapping the horse races, is even if you intend to bet a certain play into a certain pool on a given day, your opinions might not necessarily fit it. So I guess we'll see where we come out in terms of this Belmont pick 5 on Saturday.
Yeah, no doubt. Sometimes just determining you're going to play a sequence isn't always the smart way to go. Just like determining you're going to play a race. Like some people might have played the Preakness last week just because they thought it's the Preakness you have to play. Well, maybe it doesn't align with your opinions or offer any value. So you kind of move on. Before we jump into the sequence, I want to say I'm still going to be a little bit of get off my lawn old man guy, and that I missed the Met Mile this weekend, but we'll still get it in 2 weeks. But that still sticks. I always used to look forward to Memorial Day for the Met Mile. One of my favorite races every year, even at its new spot on the calendar.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely one of my favorite races too, and fingers crossed, it feels like we've got a good one on tap this year. Hopefully all the horses stay healthy and they can all come together, because it feels like that could be a real clash. Some of the top sprinters and milers out there right now, but we'll get to talking about that in a couple of weeks, I'm sure. Let's go back to this Saturday's card. Race 6 through 10 is this pick 5 sequence. As I said, the Soaring Softly is the feature. That's race 7. Good mix of races in this sequence. We've got an optional claimer to start it off, also a claiming race later on, allowance race going a marathon distance on the turf. So let's go through, Craig, and we'll begin with this 6th race that kicks off the pick 5. It's an optional claiming, 62,500. Non-winners of 2 other than is the condition, the allowance condition, going the 7 furlong distance on the main track. And there are some pretty good runners in this race. Unfortunately, not the largest field, just 6 betting interests in this 7-horse field, but we do have some horses that have run some nice speed figures before, including the number 3 Vittorio, who I would imagine is going to be the favorite in this race. Since switching into the Bill Mott barn at the start of this year, he hasn't won yet, but I would say he's run well in all of his starts for this stable, and this turn back in distance to the 7 furlongs, I suppose it's a question mark, but based on his prior form, there's an argument he should handle it.
Yeah, he should. That's the one question I have for him, is he hasn't had a lot of chances to run around one turn since very early in his career. The last couple times he's tried it, things haven't gone very well. So yeah, I think it's a question mark, but he's certainly the class of the race. I mean, just looking back two races and seeing he was 4th in a race with Last Samurai and Classic Causeway, both of whom have been in very good form this year. He's clearly the one to beat. It's not like he's turning all the way back to 6 furlongs either. But I do think there's some other concerns. One, the pace projector. There's not a whole lot of early speed in this race. We show majority partner who's doing a little bit of turn back on his own from a mile the last couple times back to 7 furlongs. He is a front runner, and anytime I see a horse turning back in distance shown on the lead in a shorter race on the pace projector, my ears perk up a little bit and I get interested because it just seems like a really good spot for him.
Yeah, I think Majority Partner fits this race very well. I guess the one concern I have with Majority Partner is that the lone recent victory, two back, when he won that N1X allowance race, he really did have everything go his way that day. Got loose on the lead, blue color coded pace figures. There was just nobody to go with him, and he was facing another good horse in Ouster who had run some nice speed figures, also a New York bred, but he had a significant tactical advantage over Ouster that day and was able to sort of dominate on the front end. I guess you can forgive his last race because of the fast pace that he got involved in, though I still am scratching my head trying to figure out how the turf horse Call Me Harry beat him on that occasion. Didn't see that coming, to say the least. But Majority Partner, he's run plenty of nice speed figures in the past, and as you said, the turn back to 7 furlongs, it probably is going to benefit him.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I don't think the race is just among those either. We have Happy Farm, a horse who's won a whole lot of races, has run some nice speed figures that are competitive with this group. I guess the one concern with him would be his last race, where he didn't run very well in an off the turf race, but that was over a sloppy track, was a race without a ton of pace. So he certainly had some races he could get back to put him in the winner's circle.
Yeah, the horse that I really don't want in this race is the number one, Colonel Bowman, or I guess I should say I don't really want the David Jacobson entry. It just feels like this is an entry that has to take money by default for a couple of reasons. I mean, Colonel Bowman just is the kind of horse that has a lot of wins on his resume, and horses with a lot of wins just tend to take money, but also the two halves of this entry are ridden by Irad Ortiz and Joel Rosario, so feels like there's going to be some money pulled in this direction, and I just think Colonel Bowman doesn't really stack up against this field from a class perspective. He's generally been beating up on weaker company, and the same thing for Safa's Day. I mean, he's just hasn't run a particularly fast race recently and is also moving up in class. So if they take any money in here, they're ones that I would want to leave off my tickets.
Yeah, we're thinking the same way. I wouldn't like either one of these horses in the race if they were in alone. And when you put them in as an entry, you're going to get even less value as you're going to get the action from people who like both either one of the horses bet into one. So I don't like entries in particular. In particular in these kind of races, and especially when I don't like either half, I just wouldn't want any parts of using them. I think Colonel Bowman's a little cheap, as you say. This pretty big jump up in class. He hasn't run quite as fast as some others, and Safi's Day has run even slower in his races.
Yeah, and to finish up this race, I'll just circle back to the horse we started with, Vittorio, because I don't know if I really gave my thoughts on him. I do think he's the horse to beat in this race, Craig, and I identify him as the most likely winner. I'm not that concerned about the turn back in distance. I actually felt like the mile and an eighth last time was probably pushing him beyond his limit. I know that he's run well going two turns in the past, but mile and an eighth can be the kind of distance that really draws out a horse's stamina a little bit, and he was just found wanting late. That was a blanket finish, but there were some other good horses in there, and he just came up short in the end, but I thought he ran really well in both of his two prior starts, including that Essex Stakes when he was right there at the end with horses like Last Samurai and Classic Causeway. I mean, there's no doubt Vittorio is the class of this field, and I'll be interested to see if he's quite as far back as he's depicted on the pace projector, because he has shown plenty of tactical speed in his prior starts, including those prior sprint races where he's actually been up on the pace in those races. So maybe they've trained it out of him recently that he's coming from off the pace in some of the longer spots, but I won't be surprised when he's more forwardly placed this time. And I just think he's the kind of horse that I don't really want to go against in a pick five sequence. I'll use a little Happy Farm, who just often is a bettable price and typically shows up with a good race, even though he doesn't always win. And I'll use a little Majority Partner, but my main horse would be Vittorio.
Yeah, we're pretty much on the same page. Maybe I would use Majority Partner and Vittorio in equal strengths just because of the pace advantage. But I'm with you. I would expect Vittorio to be closer up than he's shown on that pace projector. his rider obviously won the Kentucky Derby, but aside from that, he's been riding really well of late, showing a little more aggression. So I would be surprised if he's back in last as we have him.
Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence. Race 7 is the Grade 3 Soaring Softly, going 7 furlongs on the Widener turf course for the 3-year-old fillies. And honestly, Craig and I just got done talking about this race when we recorded our DRF Stakes preview just about an hour before this. So we're going to dive back in here on this podcast and maybe have a looser discussion about it. And, Craig, the thing that we were talking about when we did our Stakes preview is that even though I identified a prohibitive morning line favorite here in the number 2 Love Appeals, who I pegged at 6-5. She's definitely the horse to beat, no argument about that, but there's some positive things to say about every one of the 6 horses entered in this field, and it's the kind of spot where if Love Appeals does go off at a really short price, you might be able to find some value elsewhere.
I think there's some talent in this field. I'd be surprised if the 6 Senior Prank won, but not like blown away. It is a Chad Brown horse. Lately raced, only second time on turf, so even she could improve. So I'd agree with you. All 6 of the horses in here can win, and when that's a scenario, I don't want to take a really short price on a favorite like Love Appeals is going to be. Just because, it just seems like she's going to be overbet. She can certainly win. I have no knocks on her last race whatsoever when she wins a turf sprint at 6 furlongs by nearly 5 lengths with a good speed figure. I mean, it's a really impressive performance. I just don't know how much further she can go off of that race. While I do expect some of the others to make a big forward jump in the speed figure department.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes Love Appeals look formidable in this race is that she has the fewest questions to answer. The 7 furlong distance, I think, is maybe something that you have to wrap your head around for a few of the horses in here because they're either going longer than they've gone or shorter than they've gone. And it just feels like the 7 furlongs is not going to be any kind of issue for Love Appeals. I mean, she has one going the 7.5 furlongs around 2 turns at Gulfstream, which usually plays more like a mile race. She was so impressive going 6 furlongs last time, going away at the end at Aqueduct, earning that career best and field best 112 TimeformUS speed figure. So it just feels like this race fits her really well, and Christophe Clement has found a nice spot for her. But, like I was saying on our stakes preview, all of that is exposed for everybody to see, so it's going to be inherent in the price, and there are some others that maybe have to make some conjectures about whether or not they're going to handle this distance, but at least the upside is there. And, Craig, you were touching upon the fact that there are 2 Chad Brown runners in this field, and I agree, Senior Prank may be a little tough to make, but the number 1 Lady Beth is a horse that I know you have some interest in, and she is one of those that certainly has upside.
Yeah, I still would say please watch our preview. We appreciate it, but she's the horse I picked first on the preview. It's not that I think she's a standout, but she ran a 91 Timeform US speed figure in an off the turf onto synthetic race at Belmont Park. She won by 4 lengths, 91, as I said, and I just think she has a lot more in the tank. If you go back and watch that replay, which Gulfstream replays are really easy to find on YouTube, if you don't want to watch through your ADW. And just the way she won this race, she was right there on the lead, and we didn't really discuss the pace situation in here. I think it's pretty murky, and I think it's going to be a rider's race, as we haven't seen a whole lot of true front runners, but she was right up there on the pace, and just the way she cruised by a horse who actually took more money than her in the race. The horse was the favorite, and she went by her without being asked, while the other horse was just under a complete drive, basically cantered to the wire. It doesn't look as pretty on the synthetic surface. They don't have that same flow of motion that you see on the turf, but I just really liked what I saw. I know you mentioned on the preview she's coming in off a layoff. Some of that has to do with, or probably all of it has to do with her having to, she was entered in a turf race, which was taken off the turf, so she didn't run there, but she's been working out steadily ever since. So she's one of the horses I was talking about that I fully expect her to take a big forward jump on speed figures.
Yeah, it's funny that race that she was scratched out of. I think it was the Memories of Silver at Aqueduct in April. Both she and Queen Picasso were entered in there, and I actually picked Lady Beth on that day, and I was kind of upset that it came off the turf. I agree with everything you're saying, Craig. I think that she showed ability on debut, and there could be a forward step here, and she seems like one that's going to have no problem transitioning that form to the turf, especially given her European dam side pedigree. So a lot to like about her. I do wonder about the 7 furlongs for her. She just strikes me as one that might be more comfortable going longer based on what I saw in that debut. But that tactical speed that you mentioned, it could serve her well in a spot like this where Chad Brown's other horse is more of a confirmed closer. So maybe that will give some impetus to go forward with Lady Beth. I ended up picking the number 4, Queen Picasso, who is another horse coming out of a Gulfstream Park debut win. She did win on the turf, so that kind of removes one of the questions about her. She obviously handles the surface. Did win going longer, like Lady Beth, a mile and a 16th, and she got a very good trip that day, Queen Picasso did, sitting on top of a fairly moderate pace in a race that was pretty much dominated towards the front end. There wasn't a whole lot of closing going on behind her, but I liked the way that Queen Picasso traveled into the race. She was just moving really easily past the leader to the quarter pole. Didn't finish maybe going away the way that you'd want to see, but that doesn't bother me so much because now they're turning back in distance, and she strikes me as one that is going to handle slightly shorter trips, just given the fact that she's by Kingman, who is more of a miler sire in Europe. And on the dam side, there is plenty of sprint pedigree. She is a half-sister to a horse that won the 7 furlong Group 1 Prix de la Forêt at Longchamp. On the dam side, the dam's a half to a horse that won the Group 1 Moigler Stud as a 2-year-old, another 7 furlong event. So I think the pedigree is there for her to go a little shorter, and she's another one, like the horse that Craig likes, who's got that tactical speed to be forward in a race where I think the jockeys are really going to decide where their horses are placed early, and I would imagine between the 2 Christophe Clement trainees, there'll be a little more intention to get Queen Picasso forward as opposed to Love Appeals, who has run a little better when they've held her up in behind horses and produced that kick. So I think we're going to see a more aggressive ride from Queen Picasso than maybe the pace projector indicates. And I put her on top just thinking that the price would be fair enough. But this is a race, Craig, where you can make a case for everybody. I even want to include the number 5, Quarrel, going out for the lower profile Bobby Robato barn. Just a horse that I think is going to be easily the biggest price in this race, but she ran a competitive speed figure last time when she was a 2-year-old that was going a mile and a 16th, but she ran well sprinting on debut and strikes me as one that's not going to mind a little less distance. We'll see if she's ready off the layoff, but I just think the price is going to be enticing enough that she's certainly one that I would use.
I can see that. My only concern with her, I mentioned it on our preview, was the trainer doesn't do all that great with layoffs. I didn't dig into Formulator, but I saw on TimeformUS he's rated a 19, so it's not great. But he's going to be a price, and she ran a 101 speed figure in November of her 2-year-old season. So if she comes back ready to go, she could run speed figures right up approaching that 110 mark, maybe even higher. So I've got no issue with her. I did want to mention the Queen Picasso race. When I originally looked at it, I was a little concerned because she didn't win all that easily, as you noted. She only ran a 93 TimeformUS speed figure, but the speed figures are tough at Gulfstream on the turf for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to get into. Again, we've covered them in the past, but it's proven to be a pretty strong race. All the horses coming back out of that race have improved their speed figure, some significantly. So if you wanted to tell me that race is underrated a bit, I'm not going to argue with you.
Yeah, that's something I actually forgot to mention. I'm glad you brought it up. There have been 5 runbacks from that race, and I think all 5 of the runbacks finished either first or second, and I think 4 of them significantly improved their speed figures by 4 to 5 points or even more than that. The runner-up came back to run 12 TimeformUS speed figure points higher, winning her next start. So definitely some things to like about that race. And Craig, we didn't even mention the number 3 American Apple, who certainly can win this race. I mean, she's last year's Grade 3 matron winner on this circuit and is coming in off some decent races in Kentucky where she faced some nice horses like Love Reigns and Dance Macabre. So contention runs pretty deep in this field, even though it's just 6 runners signed on.
Yeah, I would have no argument with her. She hasn't really run at the distance. She tried a mile earlier in her career and faded like she'd be one who liked the sprint. She turned back, won at 6.5 and 6. Since then, she's been in three straight 5.5 furlong races. She's ran okay. She didn't really run great in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint, but she wasn't embarrassed after leading after I think it was a half mile almost. And she's run okay this year, but you just have to figure out is this really what she wants? Maybe it is. I think that's the big question for her.
Yeah, and like you said when we did our preview, it's a race where you could make a case to use everybody. It could be a spread race depending on your opinions in some surrounding legs. For me, I would lean on Queen Picasso and to a lesser extent Quarrel, but just because I think that they're going to be the best value based on my opinion. So in a wide open race like that, I just want to press the horses where I'm getting the expected value. And I would use a horse like Lady Beth and even Love Appeals to a lesser extent. But I would tend to go with the prices in those situations. So we'll see what the opinions are in the surrounding races, but that's definitely a difficult one to fit into a pick five sequence.
Yes, it is. You would think with the small field it might be easier, but for me it wasn't. It's one I will look at the board, and it seems like there might be some value playing some vertical bets in there for me. Pick five, it might make this sequence a little too difficult.
Move on to the next leg of that pick five sequence. Race 8 is a $25,000 claiming race going the 1 turn mile distance on the dirt track at Belmont. And Craig, this is a race where we've got a few class droppers, horses going out for some barns who have success, like Linda Rice, a horse like the number 6 Glory Road, who I did make the 2-1 favorite, who has run plenty of races that would make him very competitive here, even at higher levels than this, twice winning for $32,000 in recent months at Aqueduct. But arguably his form is tailing off a little bit, so Linda's dropping him in class. He makes sense, as does a horse like the number 8 Dust Devil, but I think the concern with both of those is that they don't possess that much early speed, and as you go through this field, it really doesn't appear to be that much speed signed on in general.
No, it's a race. We don't have the early favors early flag, but as you look through the PPs, I do think it's a bit murky. I'm not sure who's going to go in the front, and those kind of races are always more likely to be slow than fast on the front end. And it's just said nearly all the horses in here have some questions. You mentioned a couple of the morning line favorites. Another one is My Friend's Beer, who also has some questions, in my opinion, just because he's new in the Peter Walter barn. And as good a trainer as he is, he's really not that great on the New York circuit. So I don't know if you want to take a short price there either.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's definitely a horse that you have to form an opinion about because he's been in great form, My Friend's Beer, and there are a lot of other horses in this race that are arguably not in the best form, and some of them are dropping in class. So I do want to kind of pay attention to a horse that might just be doing well right now in a race where his rivals perhaps aren't. And I think that makes My Friend's Beer a strong contender, at least in my opinion. Peter Walter, I agree. He hasn't posted the kinds of numbers in New York that we see from him maybe on other circuits, but he did win some races at Aqueduct over the winter, and it just feels like when his horses look live, they generally run well enough. Maybe they aren't overperforming, but he is a trainer if he does one thing well. Definitely does well off the claim, and particularly first off the claim with dirt routers. If you look it up in Formulator, he is 13 for 42, 31% with a $3 ROI over the past 5 years. So those are the kind of numbers that make me want to upgrade a horse like My Friend's Beer. And like I was saying, he's just in great form. He's seeking his 3rd victory in a row. It's not like he's moving up in class. They're just keeping him at the same class level, looking to get that victory. As given how murky this pace scenario looks, the fact that he's drawn the rail, getting the apprentice Jamie Torres, who, from what we've seen, is a rider that's typically pretty aggressive, I won't be surprised when this one goes forward, and I think that could be a winning strategy in a race like this to just kind of, be decisive, because some others towards the outside might get caught a little off guard. And my friend's beer, I really liked his last race at this level. That was a day, April 14th at Aqueduct, where I thought the rail was really not the place to be. And he was outside for most of his trip, but for about a furlong at the top of the stretch, he did drift down inside and actually was still able to accelerate away, even though he drifted into that deeper part of the racetrack. So I just think he makes a lot of sense in this spot. Maybe he won't be favored, just given the presence of a horse like Glory Road in the race. But I would rate my friend's beer as the most likely winner.
Yeah, I have no problem with him. I just wanted to note the questions. He's definitely one I would use if I play a pick five. One of the horses he beat in his last race is in this race, Pit Boss. He's already come back to win out of that one, as has another horse who actually finished last that day, came back to win on the drop in class. So I've got no issues with him at all. I did want to mention a price horse I'm a little bit interested in, and it's because of the pace scenario you mentioned, and that's Al Cool's, the three horse. His connections are ones that are always going to be a price. They don't win very much, the trainer or the rider. But if they were going to win, it could be this kind of race where maybe he's the horse that goes to the lead. I think he had some excuses in his last race. Before that, he had run some good speed figures at Aqueduct without being able to get the job done. And I think maybe his form's dirtied up a little bit, and I expect him to run pretty well.
Yeah, I've got no problem with the idea that you could search for a price in this race. And, Al Cool's, if you take away the connections, I mean, just based on the form and the speed figures, I mean, he's a strong fit in this spot. I totally get it. It is a little tough for me to take the rider, who just has not really had much success on this circuit. And when you watch some of the rides that he gives, it's not not poetry in motion, let's say, but the horse definitely has competitive form. It did move up maybe a little bit on some sloppy or wet sealed tracks 2 and 3 back, so maybe that's an explanation for why the speed figures rose a little bit in those races. But look, I mean, I'm making some minor points about a horse that is going to be maybe a better price than he should be just based on the connections. So he's one that you could consider. If I had to throw out a price that I thought was interesting, who's even higher on my morning line, it would be the number 5 Blake B, another horse that could potentially be forward in this race. This horse can just be kind of random. Sometimes, without any warning, he'll just show up with a competitive effort and run well enough to win a race like this, like he did back in November of last year at Aqueduct, or like he did in April of last year at Belmont. He's randomly competitive at levels like this, and his form has obviously gone south recently, but I will say he showed some signs of life last time, because that was a pretty fast pace that he was contesting, racing down inside, and that was a race that was dominated by outside closers, so maybe a sign that things are turning around, and now he gets a rider switch to Javier Castellano. Just some things to like about a horse that's going to be a huge price in this race. And then, Craig, we should mention the 2 horses that are going to take money towards the outside, Glory Road and Dust Devil. To me, they're fine, but they're going to need some pace to close into, and it just feels like both of them might not necessarily be in the best form.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty obvious with Glory Road as he's moving down the class ladder. He's won a couple times in the Linda Rice barn, and now he drops, and it hasn't been that long. So to me, that's not a great sign. Not something I want to see at a horse who's 2-1. Maybe will be even a little lower. Dust Devil, I think maybe his form's a little disguised because he's been in some races without a lot of pace. But as you said, he's not going to get a whole lot of pace in here either. So this would be a race I'm much more interested in vertically than from a pick 5 perspective.
Yeah, Dust Devil, I mean, he does go out for that trainer that did send out the horse to run, what was it, the 125 TimeformUS speed figure last week in that maiden race. Not to say that there was anything going on with that horse, but you do always want to perk up when a barn sends out a horse to run an otherworldly performance like that. Maybe it's going to start some trend in the barn. And Dust Devil, kind of like that horse, does show a much improved last workout. So maybe it's just something to be aware of with him. But yeah, Dust Devil just in general is a horse that I struggle to really warm up to, because he's a little one-paced in his races. He tends to be at the mercy of paces, needs good trips to be successful, and we'll just see if that works out here for him. Let's move on to the 9th race, and Craig, this is a weird race. Going 1 3/8 miles on the inner turf course It's an N1X allowance, but I've got to say, it's one of the weaker N1X allowance races on the turf that I can remember at NYRA, especially at this time of year. It just feels like a lot of horses that typically wouldn't be good enough to win at this level, but you sort of have to give them a second look because it's hard to identify who the clear horse to beat in this race is. I mean, I guess just by default, maybe it's the number 4, Inflation Adjusted, who goes out for Strong Connections, Mike Maker and Irad Ortiz, but when I start to take apart Inflation Adjusted's races, I'm not convinced that he necessarily is better going these marathon distances, and his recent form and speed figures, they're just okay.
Yeah, and you can kind of say that about everybody in here. This race only has a race rating of 106, which is really low for an allowance race, non-winners of one. It's not state breds, as you said. It's kind of an open race. So it's one where I had a hard time latching on to anyone, getting too excited about. I guess if I had to make a top pick in here, and I'm going to ask you what the story is or what your thinking was, making them 7-2 on the morning line, it would be the outside horse Mosey. And I guess it's just because I'm looking for something different from somebody who maybe has some untapped potential that we haven't been able to see yet because I'm just not all that enthused with all the other horses drawn inside of them.
Well, Craig, I think you just basically summed up the story with Mosey. It's the kind of race where, as a morning line maker, I kind of have to play psychologist a little bit with the betting public. And yes, Mosey doesn't look like a 7-2 shot on paper, especially at this level. But when you go through this field, I can just kind of predict that everyone's going to be like, oh, not this horse, not this horse, not this horse. And you get to Mosey and it's like, oh, finally, somebody with some upside. Let me go for him. And, I feel like a lot of line makers would probably make this horse 8-1. And everyone would say, oh, this horse is really sexy at 8-1. And then he ended up going off at 3-1. Well, I tried to get ahead of that stuff. So I'm going to peg him at 7-2 and hope that's about right on him because it's difficult to make a morning line on a horse like this. It's coming off such a long layoff where you sort of have to project some improvement, but how much improvement is the right amount to project is hard to say. But no, Craig, he's a really interesting horse in this race. I mean, aside from the line that I said on him, I picked him on top in here, as I think a lot of people will, just because he's the new face in a race where there are a lot of horses that I don't want. And I mean, before I make the full case for Mosey, I mean, I just want to kind of go through some horses in here. I mean, Danzig with the Stars, I think at first glance, looks like a viable alternative because he's run plenty of speed figures at this level that make him competitive, but I don't know. I didn't love his performance going 1 3/8 at the end of last year. And when you look at his 2022 form, he's a horse that took a while to sort of get into top form when he came off the layoff. And this isn't a barn that's really known for winning off layoff. So I just feel like Danzig with the Stars, and what's not going to be that much of a price is not one that I wanted to fall for. I mentioned Inflation Adjusted. I mean, some of the others in here, like Fighter in the Winds, got some prior form that makes him competitive, but he's been terrible since the trainer switched to Mike Maker. So, I mean, when you come down to a horse like Mosey, there are things to like. His lone speed figure or his line performance on the turf, I should say. Craig, you can talk more about this, but I would imagine it's sort of tough to make figures for a race like that at the fairgrounds because it's 2-year-olds at the end of the season. You sort of have to project some improvement, and it was also a very slow-paced race. And I will say it in retrospect, and it's easy to say this in retrospect, that might be a speed figure that could be quite a bit higher, or maybe a race that we should have given more of a pace upgrade to, because there have been plenty of runbacks from that race that have done some good things, including third place finisher Verstappen, who people might remember just recently won a graded stakes on turf from the Elkhorn.
Yeah, it's a race. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I remember specifics from a race that was like a year and a half ago. But as I look through the chart, I mean, it's certainly one where the horses improved coming out of it. You expect some improvement. They're 2-year-olds. They're going to be getting faster. But this was pretty noticeable improvement. But in the end, I don't even know how much that speed figure really matters. I'm not going to hold it against the horse. And it's not like he has to make a huge leap. I mean, the horses in this field are running mid 100 type figures, and it's not really hard to envision him being able to do that first time off the bench for Christophe Clement.
Yeah, let me just say something about that last race at Fairgrounds when you watch it. this horse just looks like one that wants to run all day. I mean, he's by Uncle Mo, and he's got that typical like low head carriage and long stride that you think of with the Uncle Mo's. But I mean, there's plenty of good turf breeding on the dam side, and obviously he moved up on the turf. But when you watch him run, he's just this one-paced sort that just plods along and keeps getting stronger as the race goes on. It just feels like the intention is there, bringing him back, going this demanding distance. Like Christoph is saying, this is what this horse really wants to do. Let's get right to it. He's been off for so long. Let's just put him in the race that he belongs in. And I was looking up his work tab, and that last turf workout at Payson Park on April 29th, it's an exact match for Soldier Rising, who just recently placed in the Grade 1 Man of War for this barn. So the fact that they seemingly worked this horse in company with a Grade 1 turf horse might speak to some intention there. So that's kind of all the whole story why I think this horse is not going to be that big of a price in this race, but also why I think he can beat this field.
Yeah, just one more thing. I don't want to spend our whole podcast talking about Mosey, and then we watch him run fifth at 5-2 or something. But I also like the placement. I don't think it's any accident that he showed up at a mile and 3/8. If this horse had showed up in a mile and a 16th allowance, I wouldn't be as interested. I think it shows intent. I think it shows they think they know what this horse's whole card is going to be. So he'd be the pick for me. If I had to pick one of the others, it would probably be the morning line favorite, inflation adjusted, just because I think he's probably better than the rest of the horses. You can probably excuse his last couple. As he ran okay, and maybe they're a little short for him. Some of his races going longer have been better, particularly the first time for Mike Maker when he went a mile and a half. He ran an okay second, but if I'm playing a pick five, I'm going to lean very heavily on Mosey just because I just can't get excited about anybody else.
Yeah, and I did want to spend a little time sort of talking about that because it's a question that I would imagine people would have. And I got a text from our mutual friend Andy Serling about that specific morning line on this horse because he was kind of saying to me like, oh, I thought I picked a clever horse here, and I just kind of said to him, I feel like this is going to be a clever horse for a lot of people, and often those end up not being the most clever horses. But this could be one that just wins anyway because for all the reasons we said, this is the right kind of spot for a horse like him. And yeah, I mean, when I was making my picks for this race, I put Afjan second, and I can't even say that I love Afjan, but he just feels like a horse that's going to get the distance, and he's this ploddy horse that probably will go the mile and 3/8 on the turf and has to improve a little bit, but it's the kind of race where if I'm not wanting to settle for the short prices, I have to keep an open mind. So, I mean, I could use a horse like him as a backup, but it's just the kind of race where the pickings are slim. Move on to the last race in this Pick 5 sequence at Belmont, the last race of the day at Belmont on Saturday. It's a New York bred maiden special weight event for the fillies and mares going 6 furlongs. And finally, Craig, a full field. And makes it a difficult way to end the sequence, maybe, if you're going to go against the morning line favorite in here, the number 9, Loon Cry, who, despite the fact that it's a large field, I do think she's going to be a pretty short price in here because she just has some pretty obvious merits. She's run well in all 3 of her starts, including in her lone turf start 2 back, and they wanted her to be on turf last time, rained off. She still ran well. She makes a lot of sense, but I think that there are some others to consider in this race where, given how large the field is, I don't necessarily want to take a short price on anybody.
Yeah, she's an interesting horse for me in that a couple of the horses who were coming out of that race have run back and run much better speed figures. One of them on dirt, so I don't put a whole lot of stock in that. But the horse who won ran a good second with a way better speed figure. But I still think the speed figure is pretty good. And for me, I mean, I think it's a pretty accurate take on that race. And it would be hard for me to take a low price in a big field like this. So I actually landed on a couple other horses that I like in here, and they'd be the two I would use in a pick 5. The first one will be the 5 horse, Photon, a horse who just has not been able to get back on the turf lately, but ran pretty well on it last year and actually ran better speed figures than what the favorite has run by several points. Should be a little faster here, so I think this one's going to like getting back to turf. And the other one is a 7 horse, a horse who Autumn, a filly who took a lot of money for Shug McGahee first time out. His horses aren't always meant. He does win sometimes first out, but it's not really his MO. Had an unfortunate incident where flipped heels and fell and didn't finish the race basically, but she was well meant, and I would imagine that she's going to be well meant this time as well. So those are the two that interest me the most.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about both of those horses, Craig. Just to get back to Loon Cry for a second, that race on April 8th, where she got the 85 TimeformUS speed figure, there were two divisions of that race that day, and they got very similar times. And I think the two Christophe Clement runners, Loon Cry and Strictly Taboo, that are drawn right alongside each other here, they're coming out of the two different divisions of that race, and it's a situation where just the way that the TimeformUS speed figures work, we gave a pace upgrade to the one with the faster pace and a pace downgrade to the one with the slower pace. This is one where I think it's causing a little bit too much separation between these races, when maybe Loon Cry's coming out of the stronger race, the slow-paced one, than the fast-paced one, which looked a little bit weaker. But it's tough to be totally sure about that because, like you said, the runbacks have been limited. And Loon Cry, she did improve next time, but it was on the dirt, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. So just kind of wanted to make that point about her race at a horse that's going to be a pretty short price in here. As for Photon, my problem with Photon, Craig, is that while her two turf speed figures do make her competitive, she was good on the dirt before that, and her two dirt races since those turf races have just been awful. So I kind of wonder, like, what happened? Maybe the blinkers didn't agree with her because her two poor races did come with the blinkers on. Now they're coming off. If you want a reason why she might run better, maybe she just really hates a sloppy track at Aqueduct. It's hard to say, but those last two performances bother me, just given how well she had run on the dirt towards the start of her career. But like you said, I mean, she did run well enough on the turf to be competitive here, if she can get back into form. And as for Autumn, that horse who did clip heels and fall on debut, we can't watch that race replay, at least on your ADW. Just a pro tip for some people who do want to watch that race, if you can stomach seeing a horse fall, just look up the America's Day at the Races replay on YouTube, and you can go to the point in the long, like the 5-hour broadcast where this race takes place, and that's the way you can watch some of these replays in New York that you don't have access to on your ADW or in your past performances. And when I watched that race, Autumn was really traveling like she was going to run well. She was in the bridle, was kind of ready to go, arguably responded a little too well when Jose Lezcano finally asked her for a little bit, and a horse veered out in front of her, and that's when she clipped heels. But I don't know if she was going to win that race, but she was going to run okay. It's funny that Jose Lezcano sort of just came back from that injury last week, and he's sort of immediately back on this horse that caused the injury at that time. So I'm sure he'll be looking for some redemption here. I wonder what price she'll be. She was sort of a tough one for me to peg. I made her 8-1 on the line. Given how much money she took on debut, I won't be surprised if she takes more money than that, but I think she's definitely a win contender here. I wanted to get a little crazier in this race because I feel like there are some horses that are going to suck in a lot of play, and there might be some that fall through the cracks a little bit. One horse that I'm interested in, Craig, that I'm just giving another chance to, is the number 6 Lakeside Getaway, who I thought ran really well two-back when she was contesting a very fast pace that came apart at the end, and that was a decent open race at Gulfstream, and based on that performance, I thought she was super interesting coming back in that New York bred race at Aqueduct last time, and for whatever reason, she just didn't show up. I mean, she was in that more fast-paced division of that race, but I mean, she chased and just had no answer in the stretch. Maybe going a little longer here, the 7 furlongs, will agree with her better. I will say Mike Trombetta is the kind of trainer who can just be a little random at times, and maybe she'll just get over that performance and get back to the filly that we saw two back in this spot, because I do think Lakeside Getaway has it in her to run with a field like this, and the price should be much better than it was last time, just based on that performance.
Yeah, one thing I would add is she was coming back on pretty quick return off of a ship from Florida to New York. She's been given more time here, so I could definitely see. For me, I wouldn't use her as much as the other two, but she was the other filly in the field that I would include on my tickets as I was playing a pick five. I did want to address real quick. It's a little bit off topic, but you mentioned the split division of that race, and it kind of goes back to the 7 furlongs being such a rare distance on the turf. We only see it at a couple of tracks, and it's one where I've actually considered almost treating them like route races, and it's one I really need to kind of go back and study with the way we do our pace adjustments. Where at the very least, I'm not sure we should be punishing horses for slow paces like we do in shorter sprint races, but it's just one of those where when we originally designed the algorithm, we had to make the cutoff somewhere. So we just kind of went between the 1 and 2 turns. But I think these races are definitely different. It's just like I said, we don't really see them at very many tracks. I think Woodbine, Belmont, and I guess Kentucky Down. So that's a whole nother world in and of itself.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you might want to make a distinction between dirt and turf because I know we handle them pretty similarly, but dirt races, horses that get to set slow paces generally have a big advantage, and the same is true on the turf. But on turf, finishing speed is more of a priority, whether you're on the lead or coming from off the pace. And in these 6 and 7 furlong turf sprints, we penalize a lot of horses that come home really fast in their races on the turf, and maybe we should be a little more lenient about that because you do actually want horses that can come home really fast on the turf, whether they're on the lead or not. So we're getting a little in the weeds here about how the TimeformUS algorithms work, but I agree with your point, Craig, and that's something that I'd be open to having a conversation about, or I'd be very curious if you come to any conclusion about that in the future, just looking at the data.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted because it's something I just have to dig through and see how the results have played out when we do downgrade those type of horses.
I do want to mention one more horse in this race, Craig, and it's a first-time starter, the number 2, Sail with the Wind. I didn't pick her on top. I have her in my pick somewhere. She's just a horse that, given all the form in this race, I think is just going to totally fall through the cracks. But there's some interesting things going on with this horse. I mean, Leah Giamatti, I know, doesn't have a lot of good horses in her stable, but when she has a live first-time starter, they run well, and sometimes at very big prices. And the fact that she's reached out to Javier Castellano to ride this horse, who I think has ridden some live firsters for her in the past, it just kind of, perks my interest a little bit. And I really like a Stern as a turf sprint sire, and I know she had another daughter of a Stern, Sailby, who won first time out at a big price on the turf a couple of years ago. So that's a horse that I'm going to use. Again, she's not my top pick. She's probably going to be a big price in this race, but she's not one that I want to let beat me because there are too many interesting things going on with her to let her fall through the cracks at what could be a very enticing price.
Well, for the most part, I leave my first time starter opinions to what you're going to tell me. So I was waiting to see if you were going to bring up any of the couple that we have. I think there's another one in the field as well who has Irad Ortiz. But to me, it's telling that you're not bringing that one up while bringing up the 20-1 shot.
Well, yeah, 3 cups full, the other first-time starter. I mean, there are a lot of things to recommend about her, too. Joe Sharp, great with turf sprinters, and plenty of turf pedigree there. But like you said, strong connection. She's got Irad aboard. I think the 8-1 that I said her at is basically the max that she's going to be. And this other one, I think she's going to be a really big price. So just some things to consider in a race that a lot of people might be looking to go thin. I'm looking to spread out a little bit in this last race. Well, Craig, that's a look at this pick 5 sequence, and now that we've gone through it all, even though the field size might not be what some people would be desiring in a sequence like this, I don't think it's the easiest sequence to put together a ticket for.
No, it's not for me. I'll kind of go through the opinions I had real quick. And in the first leg, that allowance race, I think Vittorio is very strong. I also like Majority Partner. I know you mentioned he had things easy in his last win, but I can't help but wonder if he might get them easy here. And to a lesser degree, I would use Happy Farm just because I think he might be overlooked a little because of his last race. But he wins a lot, not necessarily lately, but he could win. The Soaring Softly, we mentioned that one is pretty wide open. I would spread pretty heavily in here. Maybe the only one I wouldn't use would be Senior Prank. Lady Beth would be my top pick, but I couldn't argue really with any horses that people wanted to use. The Claiming Race, I'd probably have to spread a little bit in here. I thought you made a great case for My Friend's Beer. It's not the most reliable field. I'm gonna kind of hold my nose and punch the three in on my tickets, just trying to get through despite the connections, because I think the horse is a lot better than the price is gonna be. And then, I mean, if I would use Dust Devil of the two lower priced horses, I think Glory Road has less. Yeah, I think he's clearly regressing, whereas Dust Devil, it's a little less obvious to me. In the ninth race, the allowance going a mile and a half. We both kind of landed on the same weird horse in Mosey, who hasn't been seen in, I guess it's been a year and a half now. That's some interesting things going where you can't really say that about anybody else in here. And then the last race, I'm going to lean on the 6 and the 8 horse, Lakeside Getaway, and I take that back. The 5 and the 7, I had the right spread, but two different horses. Photon and Autumn, and I'd also use Gateway, and you've talked me into throwing the first timer in as well.
Yeah, I'd probably try to go a little thinner in a few spots, but we have a lot of similar opinions, Craig. In that first leg, I'd lean a little on Vittorio. I just think he's the most likely winner. I don't have a clever take on this race. And, for me, the backups are Happy Farm and Majority Partner, just going against the Jacobson entry. But I really don't have a particularly clever take on that race. In the Soaring Softly, like I said before, I'd lean a little bit on Queen Picasso because I just think she's going to be the right kind of price. And I would use Quarrel, who also I think will offer value in that race. Not that I'm against Love Appeals. I could use her as a backup, but I just am not sure the value is going to be there. And with Lady Beth, I just didn't prefer her on top, but she's another one that I could see running well in that stakes race. I would lean most heavily on My Friend's Beer in the 8th. I just think there are a lot of arrows pointing to him, supposed to get the right kind of trip. I'll use a little bit of the number 5 Blake B, who I just think is a crazy long shot to throw in, and the 8 Dust Devil. I agree. Of the other short prices, I do prefer him to Glory Road somewhat. In the 9th race, we're pretty much in agreement. I don't know if he's going to be much of a price. I just think Mosey is found the right kind of field, let's say, to come back off the layoff in this spot. So I would lean most heavily on him and use a little bit of Afjon, who I think can get the distance. And if I was going to go deeper, maybe a little swing low or inflation adjusted. But the latter, inflation adjusted, I mean, he might be the negative value in this race. So maybe that's a horse that you're supposed to be leaving off your tickets. And then in the 10th race, I just want, not that Loon Cry can't win. I mean, they all can win, but I mean, Loon Cry is going to be a very short price and is the most likely winner of this race. I just thought the value might lie elsewhere in this finale, and I wanted to upgrade the number 6 Lakeside Getaway, who is going to be a nice price. I know she's got some prior races that can make her very competitive here if I'm able to draw a line through the last one. And it's a dangerous thing to do sometimes, to draw a line through a race, but she's going to be a price, and I know that she's got the prior form to make her competitive. I think you made interesting points about some others, including Autumn. But that other horse that I would want to use is the number 2, Sail with the Wind, who is that first-time starter who I made the case for, and we just talked about that race.
We could probably make these a lot shorter if we just did our rundown in the beginning.
Yeah, right. Skip all that superfluous chatter leading up to it. Well, Craig, it was a real fun to talk about this sequence with you, as always. I mean, maybe not one that we're going to take a big swing at, but sometimes even these sequences that don't look the most interesting at first glance, they're always interesting angles from which to approach these races. So I find out we always have more interesting discussions than sometimes I might have actually handicapping the sequence on my own.
Yeah, and I think the sequence has a one that could be sneaky and actually pay off. Not always right about that. Sometimes you think a sequence is going to pay and it chalks out, and sometimes you think one is chalky and it pays big balloons. But I think this one was pretty interesting, given that the fields aren't the hugest until the last couple of races.
Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to this TimeformUS Forecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Craig and I will be back next week with the TimeformUS Pacecast. We'll see if we can be ready in time for Tuesday. Maybe we'll be a little tired after that Memorial Day weekend, but we'll try to get that out early next week, and we'll be back to our usual schedule next week with the Pacecast and the forecast, so look forward to that as we look ahead to some summer racing. Belmont Stakes on the horizon, just over 2 weeks away, so plenty to look forward to on the racing calendar. Everybody, thanks for tuning in again this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast coming up on Tuesday.